Hi, welcome to the Relatable Finance series brought to you by Regions Bank. I'm Tandy Hayes. In this series, we'll be talking with influencers about everyday financial topics to make them more useful, real, and simple for you. So let's get started. Hi, Grace. Welcome to our series.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So before we get into a deep dive into our financial topic today, tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, and what inspired you to start creating financial content.
Yeah, so I am a full-time freelance marketer and content creator. I started my marketing company back in May of 2021, freshly out of college, because I really just wanted a career that gave me more time and location freedom.
Okay.
I grew up always watching content creators online, but it wasn't really as big of a thing as it is now. So about 6 months into running that business, I decided, why not? Let me just start posting content. And I struggled for a bit to get my footing, figure out what I wanted to post about until I realized that, I knew a lot about money and people would ask me about money.
Right.
And I ended up reading a book called Psychology of Money, where it basically talks about how in control of your finances you feel is a major indicator of how happy you can be. And so I realized, gosh, if I could just help people feel more in control of their money, I could help a lot of people be happier. And one thing led to another, and here we are.
So I know when we spoke previously, you mentioned that you have always been curious about money and, having that financial confidence from a very early age. What do you think drew that to you? It drew you to that so early in life?
I think when I was a kid, I just realized that money could get you things that you wanted.
Right.
Like if I said, I really want to go hang out with my friends, I'm asking mom and dad, hey, can I have some money to go to the movies with my friends? And they give me money. I'm able to then go to the movies with my friends. Or, I used to save every time I was given money as a kid for my grandma, for my birthday or anything like that. I would save it and save it and save it because I knew that if I saved more, I could buy something really cool, not just something cool, something really cool. And that concept always just really intrigued me from when I was a young age.
Yeah, I feel very much the same way, right? We got allowance when we were young, but obviously you get birthday and Christmas money from parents, grandparents. And so I was the kid in my family that did the same thing, right? I actually opened my first CD at the age of 8. Okay. So, Grace, what was that moment when you realized, either early on or later in life, that you could turn your interest into personal finance and entrepreneurship into a full-time career through your content?
Yeah, I honestly, I never considered turning my interest in personal finance into a career really at all. I just thought, what I knew was normal, and I really didn't think twice about it at all. But when I was in college, I had an opportunity to work for a freelance platform, and I was basically just recruiting people onto their platform. But working with them it really opened my eyes to all the different ways people could make money and how you could make money on your own, right? And being someone who was financially savvy and who had watched a lot of content creators and entrepreneurs, I thought, okay, wait a second, this is now giving me a stronger idea of how I could make this happen. And so when I graduated and I started my marketing business, I was initially doing social media management. But shortly after, I had a client who asked me, we need some help. They were a personal finance client. They asked me, we need some help with writing personal finance blogs. Would you like to give it a shot? And I was new in my career. I said yes to every opportunity.
Sure.
So I said, sure, I'll write a blog for $20. And what naturally happens when you're researching that topic all day long, and it's a topic I'm interested in, it gave me the space to go deeper and deeper in the personal finance area, right? A lot of people don't have the opportunity to just research a topic of interest for 8 hours a day, but I did. And I ended up learning so much. And then I thought, wait a second, now I know a lot more. I can get paid to write content about this. Maybe this could be, this could be what I do my videos about, because the more I learned, the more helpful I could be to people around me. By the time I started social media, I had way more knowledge than I did on finances, even 6 months prior, because of that work experience that I had. And then over time, as I became more embedded in the creator space, I realized, okay, there are a lot of ways to make money online as a content creator, as an entrepreneur in general.
Right.
And it started to click from there.
Okay. So I know in your content, right, you talk a lot about, having that knowledge and that confidence that you've built over time is a form of being in control of your own happiness, right? What does that mean to you personally? Explain that for me.
Yeah, I mean, just generally, it's really hard to be at peace about something when it's spiraling. And, I'm a 90s kid. Maybe this is the 90s in me, but I always think about those like money grab, money booth machines from the 90s where someone's standing in there, there's cash all in the machine, and they basically take a fan and blow the money all around. And you've got like 60 seconds to try to get as much of the cash as you can, right? It's very, very chaotic. And when the fan turns off, usually people are sitting there being like, I only grabbed $5. How did I manage that? Right. And I remember we would have these at the local malls and stuff. And it's just something that's always stuck in my head. And I think our own money is a lot like that. It's like you're grasping for all these different things all the time. And it feels really chaotic. And when you take a step back to breathe, you're like, oh my gosh, I have no control over this situation. Right. Because, I felt like I'm doing all these things, but I'm really not where I want to be. And I think when you feel in control of your money, you can say with confidence, I'm intentionally putting my money here and here because it aligns with my values. And in turn, when you're spending in alignment with your values and the things that are important to you, you're going to feel a lot happier and more fulfilled because you're going to be living a life that you enjoy, right? And, versus if you don't have control over your money, and you don't know where it's all going, you might take a step back and say, dang, my money that I work really hard for has not actually helped me get the life that I want, because you're not really in control of where it's going. You're not paying attention to where it's going.
That example of that money booth, right? I've always looked at those things and it causes me like high anxiety. And one of the things that I realize most every time, sort of to your point, is that they didn't go in with a plan, right? Mm-hmm. They're just sort of grabbing at air and they're missing the money, right? And so when we think about, what you were sharing, a lot of that to me is anxiety and not having a plan. And so I know that a lot of people struggle with financial anxiety. Can you walk us through what helped you move from feeling anxious about your money, right? Not in control in that moment, to feeling more confident and being in control?
Yeah, I will say I used to feel terribly, terribly anxious about my money all the time. Anxious about whether, I had enough, whether my money was in the right places. Am I saving too much? Am I making the right decisions? Just anxiety across the board. So I can really empathize with that. And I will say I still do get anxious here and there about my finances. And I think that's normal. But what I will say is I think it comes up mostly when I haven't tracked my spending in a while, or where I don't know what's going on, right? I'm realizing I don't really have knowledge of what's going on with my money, and that makes me anxious. So what helped me was kind of adopting a mindset of, just simply like, don't cry over spilled milk. I would say to myself, look, I can't erase the debt that I took on. I can't go back on where my finances are right now. I can't go back and start budgeting 5 years prior, or, whatever financial decision I made that might be giving me anxiety. All I can really do is focus on what I'm in control of. And so I would make a plan. That was a huge, huge thing for me. I said, okay, I used to have student loan debt, and I said, this is giving me a lot of anxiety. What can I do about this? I can't go back and redo my degree. I can't go back and not sign on the dotted line again, right? I just have to look at this and say, what's in my control? I can create a plan. And so I would run the numbers on my debt, and I would say, if I put X dollars more on my debt, how much faster could I get out of that debt? Or if I want to save this much money, how much do I need to do, to save each month to get there? And what do I need to do? Do I need to take on a side hustle? Can I, negotiate a bit of an increase in pay with a client or something like that? Because I really think that anxiety, sometimes it's the fear of looking at things, but I look at it in terms of, knowing, understanding, changing. And you can't change your financial situation if you don't understand it. And you have to at least just know what's going on with it in order to understand it, to be able to change it.
Yeah, and I think that's important, right? I've worked with so many people in my banking career where, to your point, that fear of looking at something, right? And that I know that I've not been paying attention, or I picked up additional debt, or I've spent a little bit more money than I had budgeted or planned for, right? And because that makes them stressed, then they quit looking altogether. And so then I've seen people snowball, right, in those moments. And instead of taking control back, it gets more and more and more out of control and just becomes bigger and bigger. So, I heard you mention a couple different words, budgeting and plan, right? And so when you think about your budget or your plan, what are you doing that really makes your plan or your budget substantial, that allows you to be in control and to eliminate that stress or anxiety?
Yeah, for me, like my process with budgeting, I have a budget template that I created, but I mean, you can get a budget template or an app or really anything. And the point of a budget too, I want to say is not to restrict yourself like crazy. It's to assess what income is coming in and where's my money actually going. I think of it more as like, if I'm driving somewhere new, I'm not going to not put the GPS on. I mean, I could. If I don't put the GPS on, I'm going to end up,
Right.
I don't know where, because I need a GPS, right? If I want to go somewhere new with my finances, my budget really is my GPS to where I want to go. And so I have my budget template, and every month at the top of each month, I sit down and I set that budget. And, I say, okay, here's my income. Where do I really want my money to go? What do I want out of life? And how am I making sure that where I'm allocating my money aligns with that? And then once a week, usually, or sometimes every other week, since I've been doing this for a few years, I will sit down and I'll track my expenses, and I'll manually copy my expenses over into my budget template and track everything. And at the end of each month, I say, okay, how'd I do? Where am I at? And I like to approach my budget with more curiosity than judgment, and just saying, okay, what went well? What didn't go so well? Not, oh, you did this and that was awful and whatever, but just what happened? And how can I look at that, with curiosity and then make changes the next month?
Yeah. Similarly, I have a budgeting tool that I use, right? So that it keeps me on track, right? And I know what my spending is every month. I know what those fixed expenditures are, my mortgage, my utilities, those types of things. But then what am I allowing myself for the fun, right? In those moments, or goals that I have that I want to move towards. So Grace, is there anything else that from a budgeting perspective that you do or that you'd want to share?
I think the idea of budgeting really intimidates people, to be honest. And I think we can understand the mechanics of it, right? It's tracking your spending and planning where your money is going to go. But I really would encourage people to think about the mindset behind it as well. And I say this with all the love, right? But understand that you might not like it. You might not like budgeting, right? I really, and that's okay, right? I think there are a lot of things in life that we don't necessarily love doing, but we do them. I think about budgeting and taking care of your finances like brushing your teeth. Do I wake up and spring out of bed and go, I want to go brush my teeth? Like, I cannot wait to brush my teeth today. No, right? I do it because I know that if I want to keep my teeth in my head, I should probably take care of them, right? I shower every day because it's important to be clean and I want to be a clean person, right? Is it satisfying on the other end of it sometimes, right? Where you brush your teeth and you say, oh, like I have fresh breath now and like I feel more confident and my teeth look whiter, or now I'm clean and my hair looks better because I washed it. Yes, absolutely. But I think budgeting is the same way. You might not wake up and spring out of bed being like, I cannot wait to track my spending today. But you'll probably find that on the flip side, on the other side of it, you're really satisfied with the fact that you did it. And so if you can get yourself over that hump and think of taking care of your finances like you would brushing your teeth, can I give it 10 minutes a day? You'll start to see that, you'll really see results over time, the same way that you would with brushing your teeth.
Yeah, I love that analogy, right? Of it's something that we just have to become accustomed to doing. It becomes part of our routine, whether that's getting up and brushing your teeth or checking on your budget, right? So Grace, I know within your content, you talk a lot about how important it is for women to be financially informed and even have some independence within that. Why does that message resonate so much with you? Why is that so important?
Yeah, I think there are really two reasons why it's important to me personally. One is the Equal Credit Opportunity Act was passed in 1974, and it essentially banned discrimination based on sex or marital status. That was the goal. But prior to that, women could be told that they couldn't get a loan, a credit card, a mortgage, an apartment without needing a man to sign for that. Sometimes I just, I sit in my apartment and I think, my grandma probably couldn't have had her own apartment. Or I go to the store and I use my credit card, or, I was able to take out student loans. And I think there were so many women before me that, didn't have that opportunity. And I'm almost 10 when this law passed, right? And so I think about that. And I think, I feel like as a woman, I owe it to the women before me who really fought for this to not let that fight be for naught, And I also think, the second thing is that, and not to get intense or create any fear in anyone, but I think that, and this goes for everyone, not just women, but not understanding your own finances and entrusting someone else with all of that decision, whether that's a spouse, a financial professional, or just you're leaving it up to chance and you're not looking and you're just letting it kind of do its thing on the background. I think it's a really, really slippery slope to, situations of financial abuse or decisions being made on your behalf about your finances that, you wouldn't agree with. And there's countless stories that are absolutely devastating of people finding out that, that there's a joint account and they think that a certain amount of money is in it. The partner passes or they split and the money is not in the account, or, they think that something, their investments are being invested in something and come to find out it's not. And I think that the expression ignorance is bliss, ignorance can keep us feeling a little bit safer, but it's actually very, very risky, especially when it comes to your money.
And I've seen that happen, and our conversation started around, women having that financial confidence and understanding, but I've seen it happen both directions. I had a customer come into the bank whose spouse unexpectedly passed away, and they had no idea of their bills, their monthly expenditures, their accounts, their balances. I mean, no information whatsoever. And, there were moments they were surprised and it was a good surprise. And there were moments that they were surprised and it wasn't so good. But you used a phrase a moment ago, ignorance is bliss. Where do you feel the majority of ignorance lies when it comes to financial matters?
I think a lot of people are really afraid to look at their finances. And so to be ignorant to what's actually going on with their money, it just feels easier. People don't want to look at their debt totals because it's scary. I know when I graduated college, I had no idea. I knew what loans I signed for. Did I ever do the math on how much that would add up to? Nope, not until I graduated. And to log into that account was really scary. I also think that a lot of people think that they have to know a lot more about finances in order to actually take action on it. I don't think that people are necessarily ignorant in those ways. I think that they think that they're actually more ignorant than they really are. They think, I don't know enough, or so I don't know enough, so I don't have to know more, or I don't have to take any actions. You have to just really get yourself to be more afraid of the consequences of not looking at it. You have to let that outweigh the fear of looking at your finances, because the consequences are high if you don't look.
Right. And I love what you said, right? You still got to look at it, whether you want to or not. You've still got to pay attention to it. It's there. It's not changing. It could get worse throughout the process. So how did you develop the mindset of planning ahead instead of just reacting to financial emergencies? What tactics have you used?
Yeah, I've always been a planner since I was a child. I don't know if it's just that I value peace, but I think that being reactive always feels chaotic to me. And planning makes me feel more prepared and more in control of the situation. But I also really like to make decisions based on the choice that I actually want to make, not what I'm forced to make, especially when it comes to finances. I do own a 17-year-old car, and I will be driving that until it literally falls apart. I do not want to have a car payment. And my goal is to pay for my next car in cash. And so even though this car will probably last me maybe another 4 or 5 years, because it doesn't have that many miles on it, I am saving for a new car. I've been saving for the last probably 1.5 to 2 years, every single month, setting aside money for it. And so what I kind of do on the back end is about once a year, I like to sit down and look at everything going on with my financial picture and think into the next 1 to 5 years. So what is realistically coming up in the next 1 to 5 years? For me, that is, okay, my car, it's probably going to die in the next 5 years. Let's be realistic. I wish it would last longer, but we have to be realistic. She's 17, right? I will probably have a wedding, right? I'm single. I'm not even engaged. But when I'm thinking, okay, 5 years down the line, a wedding might be part of that. Or, I want to buy a home. So when I think about those things, how can I start contributing to them now? And so every month when I set that budget, I set aside a little bit for those goals. And I just send the money over into my savings. And I think that sometimes people think it's too much. They're like, whoa, like you're single. Why are you saving for a wedding? Right. But, or even a car at that matter. Right. But I think the way that I think about it is there's a best and a worst case scenario with preparing. The best case scenario is you're prepared and you can make the choice that you want because you have the money ready for it. The worst case scenario is that, you save $40,000 for a car and you end up falling in love with a $35,000 car. Worst case scenario, now you have an extra $5,000 to do whatever you want with, right? That doesn't sound like a bad case scenario. So I always err on the side of planning ahead and not being reactive. I feel like you never want to be caught off guard and then forced to make a decision based on, well, okay, I can only afford this, even though it's really not where I want to spend my money. I'd rather try to save ahead.
So I love the idea of, setting goals, planning ahead. But in those moments where you have that unforeseen emergency, right, that cost that you did not plan for, how do you make shifts or adjustments in your budget or your planning in that moment to help pay for that emergency spend?
So I have an emergency fund, which was before I started saving for any other goal. I had my emergency fund, which I started with 3 months of what my necessary expenses would be. And then I've scaled it up to 6 months. And that gives me a cushion of, if something does catch me absolutely off guard, I have that emergency fund ready to go. And I've had to use it. And it's come in handy when I've had car expenses I wasn't expecting or medical expenses I wasn't expecting. But if that isn't in place, I think just having the budget is where it really saves you, right? Because if something unexpected comes and now you're like, oh my gosh, I'm panicking. I don't know what to do. I don't even know how much money I have left to spend this month because I haven't been tracking my spending. Now it's like, oh goodness, what do we do? Right now we're scrambling. Versus if right now, let's say I had an unexpected expense, I can go into my budget and I can say, okay, I can see right now, because I've been tracking my spending all month, I can see exactly how much I have left to spend. Okay, so if I don't have that emergency fund, I really wanted to be able to spend more on dining this month, but I have an emergency. I'm going to have to reallocate that money to another part of my budget and make a sacrifice for the rest of that month. But that's why, again, I think that knowing what's going on with your money and tracking your spending is so important.
So what advice would you give to someone who is just starting to sort of take this path of understanding their finances, taking it seriously? What would you say to someone who's just starting that may feel a little overwhelmed, a little intimidated by this process?
I would say kind of what I said a little bit earlier too, where approach the whole thing from curiosity and not judgment. I think it is so easy, regardless of where you're starting financially, to get into a position where you're looking at your finances and you're just judging yourself. You're judging yourself for the debt that you have, for the house that you don't have, or, how much your rent is, or, where you're not in your finances or where you are in your finances, right? The judgment comes from every direction, right. But I would approach it from a lens of curiosity. How can I understand my own spending habits? How can I look at this and think, how did that expense make me feel? I love to look at my money that way when I'm looking at my statement. I run through transactions and say, when I think about how much I spent shopping, do I feel good when I look at that number? Do I feel good about it? Or am I feeling like, that wasn't aligned with, where I want my values to be this month, right? Approach it from a lens of curiosity. The other thing I would say is you can do this in bits. We do not need to go crazy, go wild, and try to reinvent your entire financial situation overnight. It is okay to say, you know what, I'm realizing I'm just starting to take this seriously. I probably have a lot of work to do, and I don't need to do it all in one day. I don't need to do it all in 1 month, right? You can say, all right, month 1, I'm just going to focus on logging into, my loan portals and getting a little bit more serious about my debt, running some of the numbers to see how can I get out of debt faster? Where am I even at? How much debt do I have? That can be month 1. Month 2 can be, okay, I'm going to budget. That's going to be my goal. I'm going to try to sit down and track my spending once a week for a month. Like you can really take it in bits. You don't have to try to reinvent everything overnight. And the last thing I would say too, I get a lot of people who are just starting out with their financial journeys that come to me on my social media and they're asking me questions. And the biggest thing I see when it comes to feeling intimidated by their finances, it's not even that they're not capable or whatever. It's just, you kind of have to just get over the hump of intimidation, right? You kind of just have to say, I'm intimidated and I'm still going to do it, right? And I think that's a discipline piece of it, right? when you're going to go to a new workout class and, it's a new machine, or you're doing some sort of new exercise and you're like, I don't know what I am doing and I'm intimidated. And it feels like everyone in the class is watching you, right? Yeah. You still sign up, and I don't cancel the class because I don't want to pay the cancellation fee, right? I know there's a consequence, so I show up. And I think, you go to a networking event by yourself. It's nerve-wracking, but at some point you just have to force yourself to do it. And so I think with your money, it's good to ask yourself, what am I giving up or missing out on by not taking action on these things? And let that fuel you and just give you a little push. And once you kind of get over that intimidation hump, you'll come back on the other side, right? It's that initial step that there's the most friction. And then things seem to kind of flow after that.
So in your path of getting over that, right, that moment of getting over the hump, what are some of the things that you did or the mistakes that you made on that journey of getting and becoming more financially confident?
There aren't any financial mistakes that really stick out to me in particular. I think that I've always been a saver, and sometimes to a fault. I've saved too much and didn't enjoy my life as much as I should have in my early 20s. And I see a lot of people make the mistake of, doing the same thing, of saving way too much or spending way too much. But I think you have to figure out why you're doing what you're doing, right? Are you oversaving out of a place of fear? Are you overspending out of a place of fear or out of FOMO, and feeling like, I'm going to miss out on everything if I don't do this. And I think when you understand the why behind all of it, it makes you feel a bit more grounded in your finances. Like, I really understand why I'm doing what I'm doing. But I also think that there aren't many things in life that are so irreversible you can never come back from them. And so that has given me a little bit more confidence in my finances, knowing that, okay, when I make a $30 decision, if it's a mistake, I can probably, figure some things out, right? It's those $30,000 decisions that you really want to think through a lot deeper. But as you start to make those $30 decisions over and over and with more and more intention, your confidence builds. So then when it comes time to make those $30,000 decisions, like taking out a car loan or, you're putting a down payment on a home, you have more confidence in yourself because now you understand, why do I make decisions the way that I do? Why was I previously overspending or oversaving, or what did that look like? And then you start to trust yourself because you're seeing those actions, you're seeing yourself doing what you need to do.
So when you think about, again, your path, your journey, or even those that follow you through your content, right? What do you think is that moment, or what is that biggest mind shift that helps individuals become more confident in moving through this journey?
I think it's understanding that financial decisions can be reversible. I do really think that a lot of people are afraid of making a wrong decision, so they make no decision. But making no decision is a decision in itself, right? And every decision that you're making, even if that decision is inaction, has a consequence, good or bad, right? I used to be very afraid of making wrong decisions with my finances, not saving enough, saving too much, scared to open a credit card, scared to not open one. What are the consequences of that? Should I use this debt payoff plan or that one? And it kind of stalled me, right? I ended up making no decision because I didn't know what to do. Deciding whether or not you're going to budget is likely not to send you into financial ruin, right? Or throwing a little bit extra at your debt. If you, a week down the line, you realize, I would have rather put that money on this loan over that loan. It's all right, right? The Earth's going to continue to turn. We're going to be fine, right? It's those big things that people, I think, assume are going to be the same as those little financial decisions. So then they take no action. And I think when people realize, okay, I can start small, I can start with those $30 decisions, and those ones are kind of reversible, or I can kind of clean it up if I make a mistake there, then they feel more confident to start diving into what they feel are the bigger financial decisions.
Yeah, just that awareness, right? That understanding, knowing what I'm doing, what those decisions are. I've seen over time in banking and working with clients where they're not comfortable even talking about, right? And especially, if they've made a mistake or what they consider to be a mistake, right? And to your point, most things that we do financially, they are somewhat reversible. We can fix them. It may take a little bit of time to get there, but we can help figure out a solution, a path, right? But I think one of the things I've seen, sort of to your point, is people just sort of ignore it and they don't want to talk about it. And when I say talk about it, even to themselves, right? Have that self conversation or with others who could possibly help them better their path, better their situation. So as we wrap up, just one sort of additional last question. When you think about your content and your followers or our conversation today, what's that one additional thing that you would want to share, that you would want to remind our viewers of when it comes to that financial confidence and finding that path forward?
I think if you want to create a life you genuinely love, which I think everyone does, right? The reality is that money is a tool in being able to do that. And I think you work so hard for your money, right? We spend 40 plus hours a week in our jobs. And I think to not try to understand your money or where it's going is ultimately doing yourself a disservice, right? I think people know a lot more than they think they know, and they're way more capable than they think. I think we see, especially being online, people who maybe are miles ahead of where we are financially, and that's okay. But we think that we need to be there in order to take any sort of action today. I think confidence comes from doing, because as you do it over time and you get better at it, you start to see proof that you're capable of doing it. And that gives you confidence, right? You feel good when you go to try to do something and you're good at it. You're like, oh, but sometimes it takes showing up a little bit to have that feeling. And I think when people start to show up for their finances and really take back control of them, the confidence will naturally come with that.
All right. Grace, I love that answer. I loved it. So Grace, thank you so much for joining us today and talking about your experience, your path, and sharing that little bit of wisdom and knowledge of how others can find a similar path and really start building their confidence when it comes to their journey with money. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.